Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 42. Prognosticat. The port town that falls almost exactly on the border between Frost and Lightning Country is unexpectedly busy for its size. Kurama watches the crowds bustle from the doorway of the large inn, not quite ready to push out into the street just yet. He has a mental list of bars to visit and reports from both Kiri and Konoha informants that agree Tsunade is somewhere in the village, but there's an itch of uneasiness in the back of his skull. Nothing blatant, nothing obvious, but unsettling. The captain is comfortable? Itachi says quietly from behind him, and Kurama doesn't allow himself to twitch. Shisui and Tenzo agreed to stay with him. Not the best protection available if Obito decides to pop in and finish the job, but Han and Roshi are both back on the ship since busy downs make both of them even tenser than Kurama. Roshi had muttered something about setting the last one on fire, and when Shisui flinched and nodded his fervent agreement, Kurama had decided he didn't even want to know. They'll keep an eye on B while he recovers, though, and Shisui and Tenzo will at least be able to raise a fuss if Obito turns up, so Kurama doesn't have an excuse to put this off any longer. "Then you're with me, huh?" he asks gruffly and pulls his Hiyori a little higher around his throat. As the name would imply, Frost Country is cold, and Kurama still isn't all that used to the feeling of it. "I am," Itachi agrees, watching him a little warily, but Kurama ignores that. He takes a breath, lets it out in a gust of white, and then heads down the 3 wide steps into the street. Silently, Itachi shadows him, sandals entirely soundless on the packed earth beneath them, and he's so small that Kurama is having a hard time thinking of him as the emotionless asshole who shoved a crow with a Sharingan right down Naruto's throat. Which, for the record, might have been a chocolate construct, but still tasted disgusting, and Kurama would very much like to hold a grudge. It's difficult, though. This Itachi keeps darting glances at food carts or trinket stands, and his eyes linger for a long moment on a tea house 2 blocks down from the inn, like he wants to stop. A wallet shaped like a tomato gets a tiny smile out of him, and his gaze is quick and alive and the furthest thing from the dead emotionless stare Kurama remembers seeing through Naruto. Also, he barely comes up to Kurama's elbow, and there's something so wrong about that. The man who drove Sasuke insane and pushed him down a path of ruthless revenge shouldn't look and act like a child, even now before the deed is done. But Kurama watches Itachi study a display of adventure novels with interest and has to look away. Thankfully for Kurama's peace of mind, the first bar is just down the block, sandwiched between a clothing store and a tightly shuttered building. It sounds loud even from on the street, and Kurama pauses outside the door, grimacing. Naruto frequented a few of the bars back in Konoha solely because that was where the rest of his friends gathered, but those were shinobi bars. The patrons were a lot quieter, either looking to unwind or get quietly drunk, and tended to be fully aware if they started a bar fight, they'd have an entire patrol up their butts as soon as chakra started flaring. Civilian bars, it seems, are a heck of a lot different. "I can go in, if you want," Itachi suggests, faintly dubious if the way he's eyeing the building is any tell. Kurama glances down at the 11-year-old dressed in civilian clothes and rolls his eyes a little. "Not happening, kid," he huffs. "Civilians, remember." Comprehension flickers lightning quick across Itachi's face before it slides into eerie blankness, and he says quietly, "Oh, of course, I forgot to account for that." It said like a rebuke aimed at himself, pointed and a little frustrated on Kurama's eyes. "Freak squad," he reminds himself and drops a hand firmly on top of Itachi's head. "They have to live up to their names somehow. Come on," he urges, shoving Itachi lightly in the direction of the bars. He starts forward. "I don't think our luck is good enough for this to be the one, so let's get this over with." Itachi gives him a slightly confused glance, but trots obediently alongside him, stretching to keep up with Kurama's strides. The door swings open with a hard push, and one step inside makes Kurama wrinkle his nose. It smells awful, and judging by the faint expression that manages to escape Itachi's control, it's not just Kurama's overly sensitive nose that's tugging. Pushing through the packed tables, Kurama heads for the bar without hesitation. Behind it, a blonde woman with sharp eyes is mixing drinks, and as Kurama approaches, she glances at him, then down at Itachi, and smirks faintly.
Something I can do for you, boys?
She asks, dropping a pair of glasses on a waiter's tray and elbowing him back out into the main room. She pauses, eyes sweeping over Kurama from the top of his head and down as far as she can see, and she raises a brow at him, smirk deepening. Unlike his previous Jed Cherokee, Kurama is not as dense as a particularly dumb boulder where matters of attraction are concerned. He wasn't, even before he had a body of his own, and now that he does have one, and experience to boot, the meaning of her look is clear. A little creepy, but clear.
We're looking for someone,
he says, crossing his arms over his chest.
Short, blonde, looks like she's in her 20s, and drinks like a fish. Likes to gamble and always loses.
The barkeep snorts, leaning forward to set her elbows on the counter.
Sounds like someone I would definitely remember, she says, amused. But I haven't seen her, sorry. New in town? Staying long?
Kurama pauses, studying the look in her eyes. Assessment is outweighing the flash of interest, and that's something he can use.
Us or her?
He asks, watching her in return, and knows she catches it when her smile shades towards something a little more genuine.
Both, I assume,
she says, tilting her head a little and looking at him through a sweep of smoky lashes.
But I meant you. If you're here for a few days, I'll keep an eye out. Let you know if your mystery lady turns up.
Kurama's seen more than enough interactions like this one in the shinobi world to know what happens next. He pulls a few bills out of his pocket and sets them on the counter.
Thanks, he says. We're at the Black Gull. Ask for Uzumaki.
Uzumaki,
the barkeep repeats, drawing the name out and raises a brow at Kurama.
Is that you, handsome?
Can we go now, Dad? Itachi asks, suddenly tugging on Kurama's sleeve. Startled, Kurama blinks down at him and is a little disconcerted to find that the expression on the boy's face is actually convincing. At that, the woman outright laughs, deep and throaty, and pushes back upright.
Kid, she says, thick with humor. No way is he your father, or I'm your mother. If the man doesn't want to flirt, I'm hardly going to make him. Try the act on someone else and get out of my bar. I'll let you know if I hear anything about you, girl.
Thanks.
Kurama sighs and puts his hand back on top of Itachi's head, steering him towards the exit. He glances down to find the boy staring straight ahead, and on anyone else, Kurama might say that expression was blank. But for Itachi, that's probably a heck of a lot closer to embarrassment. Feeling the eyes on him, Itachi darts a quick glance up, and Kurama arches a brow at him.
Want to explain what that was about?
He asks. Itachi waits until they've emerged into the cool air of the evening, and then says quietly, She was making you uncomfortable? Kurama rolls his eyes a little.
Yeah, he says dryly. Flirting tends to do that when you're not interested.
Momiji Zabuza's flirting just irritated you, Itachi points out, not quite stubborn, but maybe closer to curious. If Kurama had ever made a list of conversations he thought he'd have in his life, up until 30 seconds ago, this wouldn't have even occurred to him as a possibility. He stares down at Itachi at a loss for how to explain, and Itachi stares back, patient and mildly inquiring.
Zabuza and I had already had sex,
he finally says, not entirely sure how to put it into words, something he's barely experienced himself.
We know each other. And I wasn't really irritated or believing I would have fed a mistake. We were just bickering. It's amusing.
Itachi nods and looks content to mull that over for a few minutes, so Kurama quickly checks the street signs and heads left towards the gambling den that's next on the list. It's further back off the main street, and it's a bit of a relief to leave the majority of the crowds behind them. Unfortunately, Kurama's head is stuck on Itachi's question and all the implications that go along with it. He wants to ignore it, but... Sage! He thinks, a little bewildered. Hasn't the kid ever seen regular people interact before? Doesn't he know how people act and react and talk to each other? He read Kurama's body language in the bar well enough to know that Kurama didn't care for the barkeep's flirting, but his reaction was like a shinobi undercover on a mission, not one person getting another out of an awkward situation. Kurama is an ancient chakra beast created from an alien tree that crash landed on Earth, whose fruit was consumed by a crazy princess goddess, and he's been stuffed into an unfamiliar body, sent 30 years into the past, and given a mission to save the world by the first friend he ever made, who was murdered right in front of him, and he still understands more about everyday human interactions than a genius shinobi 11-year-old. That's a pretty terrifying thought. The gambling den, as a pleasant distraction, is mostly empty, and the manager is easily convinced to send for Kurama if he sees Tsunade when Kurama mentions unpaid gambling debts. He looks a little horrified, actually, and Kurama is almost certain that he'll send a runner, maybe even come himself, if Tsunade does turn up. A little irritated, Kurama checks that one off his mental list as well, shoving his hands in the pockets of his Iori as they step back out into the cold. Maybe they should hit all the inns as well, he thinks, turning his eyes up towards the heavy clouds covering the sky. It's going to snow, Itachi says, following his gaze. Naruto would love it, Kurama thinks wistfully, and he misses the brat so much it's like a physical ache. He's probably never seen snow before at this point. Konoha only gets it rarely, and while the first time around Kurama was sleeping for most of Naruto's childhood, he was still fairly in tune with the nature chakra all around them. Weather patterns have their own force, and he doesn't recall it snowing. A new experience, he thinks, smiling a little to himself. He can teach Naruto how to build a snow sculpture. And Gaara has definitely never seen snow before. Maybe not even Fu has. He and Yugito can give them a crash course. Yeah, he agrees, and it comes out lighter than he intends, almost bordering on wistful. It is. Itachi flicks a glance at him, expression unreadable, and asks quietly, how many bars altogether? Back to reality, Kurama reminds himself, pushing into motion again. 4. He answers, avoiding the main street and turning down a nearer side street instead. And one more gambling den. If we can't find her there, we'll start checking the inns. Ao and Jiraiya both seem pretty certain she was still here. With a nod, Itachi falls into step, and there's half a moment of quiet before he says, the girl who likes me? She doesn't ever act like you and Zabuza do, even though she knows me. It takes effort not to sigh aggrievedly. Kurama closes his eyes for a moment, reminds himself that he can't just ditch Itachi and finish on his own, and says a little wearily, somehow, Brat, I don't think she knows you at all. You ever had a real conversation with her? Itachi blinks at him, clearly confused. We talk frequently. Staring back, Kurama tries to push down the absolute certain knowledge that somewhere in an alternate afterlife his Naruto is laughing himself sick right now. You mean she talks, he says, and if it's a little dry, he thinks he can't be blamed. Name 3 things you've actually straight up told her about yourself. The blink look he gets is more than answer enough. You at least know her name, right? Kurama asks on the edge of true despair. Faint offense flickers over Itachi's features. Uchiha Izumi. Well, at least there's that. He probably thinks it's a failure as a shinobi not to know a person's identity, though, so Kurama doesn't think it counts for much. With a sigh, he scrubs a hand through his hair and says, do you like her, as one person to another? Is she someone you appreciate? Another long pause, which probably isn't a great sign. Itachi looks down at the packed earth beneath them, expression considering. She confuses me. She's weak and sentimental, but she awakened her Sharingan before I did, and she refuses to give up on her ideals even though they're useless and foolish. Oh boy. Kurama spends a moment trying to wrap his head around that, decides he'd rather jump off a bridge than understand that kind of Uchiha logic and upset disgust. Well, then she's obviously not weak, right? He points out, if she won't give up, she's going to get stronger, no matter what, especially if she's got ideals driving her. I made her cry, Itachi says, sounding faintly bewildered by this. It would be better if she chose a different goal. Because as she is, she can't help people the way she wants to. But she was hurt.
People are clearly not Itachi's strong point.
Look, Kurama says, fairly desperate to get this conversation back on track. Even if she confuses you, would you save her if she were in danger? Do you like her as a person enough to put yourself in harm's way for her? She's a citizen of Konoha and a member of the Uchiha clan. Itachi tells him very seriously, I couldn't do anything else. Kurama is so very done with all this. Look, kid, he says sharply, coming to a halt and turning to face Itachi. People connect to other people. It's what they do. Every single person you have ever met. They have a dream, and they have reasons for what they do, and maybe you don't understand them. Maybe you never will. But if you can look at someone you know who's trying to make a connection with you, and completely write them off, that's bad. You're not seeing people anymore. You're seeing duty, a job.
The edge of a growl in the words takes Kurama by surprise, and he has to stop himself, step back,
and take a breath to get his temper back under control.
Sage, he says, rubbing a hand over his eyes in frustration.
If you only ever look at people like that, like they're your mission, you're going to make the wrong choices, for you and for them. You can't break things down like that. This girl, Izumi, you said she wants to help people. Save her because of that, or because she has a nice smile, or because she wants to know you. Don't save her because there is no other choice. She's a human being, not your duty as the perfect son.
Itachi stares up at him wide-eyed and clearly caught off guard, and Kurama narrows his eyes right back, opens his mouth. You know, a woman's voice says just this side of Icy. Where I'm from, it's not alright for an adult to bully a child.
Kurama stiffens, every muscle suddenly tense, and turns swiftly as heeled sandals click across the street. Senju Tsunade is just emerging from the overhang of a darkened shop, and her expression is focused and sharp. Shizune is a few paces behind her, looking worried, with Tantan clutched in her arms, but Kurama can't quite look away from the woman he last saw, having her soul consumed so that Kaguya could wear her body like a festival mask. Yeah, he asks gruffly, the memory of his Naruto shattering grief for her just a little too clear for comfort. Well, since you abandoned it, I don't think you have any claim to its morals anymore, princess. Her sharp steps falter, and Tsunade comes to a halt, narrowed eyes sweeping over him carefully. A glance down at Itachi, taking in the fact that he can't be mistaken for anything but an Uchiha, and she shifts her weight back on her heels, suddenly weary.
You're from Konoha.
Kurama snorts, crossing his arms over his chest.
Looking for you,
he confirms. One of the idiots I'm traveling with got himself half-skinned. I need you to fix him.
Tsunade blenches, visibly taking half a step back. At the same moment, Itachi reproves
Uzumaki?
like that's actually going to make Kurama hold his tongue about anything. He looks down at the boy, raising a brow, and the expression Itachi returns is one Kurama's seen most often directed at Chisui. Well, at least it's better than that eerie dead look. Uzumaki?
Tsunade repeats, making Kurama glance back at her. Her expression is conflicted, caught between two emotions that Kurama can't quite identify.
You're an Uzumaki?
Yeah, so what? What do you want me to say? Kurama asks, irritated. Hello, cousin. Nice of you to stop in and visit your one remaining relative after her entire village got wiped out. Nice to know she could count on you to look after her kid.
Bristling, Shinzune takes 3 quick steps and puts herself between Kurama and Tsunade.
Leave him alone, she offers warningly, one hand reaching for whatever's up her sleeve, but before she can pull it out, Tsunade reaches up and catches her wrist.
You don't know anything about Kushina,
Tsunade says, flat and challenging.
I don't appreciate the accusation from a stranger.
I know everything about Kushina, Kurama snaps, and it's only when Itachi glances at him sharply that he remembers he hasn't actually told the rest of the freak squad the truth, and Kakashi seems to be keeping it to himself as well. Kurama's not overly invested in anyone else finding out, so he takes a breath, drags his temper back down a few notches, and says more or less civilly, We're closely related. Not a lie, technically, given the body Kurama's currently in. It also means that if Tsunade does end up in Konoha again, there's no risk of her taking Naruto to raise him herself. Tsunade steadies him for a long moment, then sighs softly, stepping forward again until she's only a few feet from him, looking up into his face.
I never saw Kushina grow up,
she says, and Kurama has to wonder if it's his own projection that makes her voice sound wistful.
Do you look like she did?
A lot like her, yeah.
Kurama acknowledges gruffly and dips his head a little when her hand comes up to cup his cheek. He lets her touch him, doesn't flinch away, because if there was ever a mother figure in Naruto's life, it was this woman. Only Kakashi's and Sasuke's deaths could rival the sheer depth of grief that Tsunade's inspired. He never got to say goodbye to her before Kaguya erased her existence, and he always regretted it. Kurama isn't Naruto, could never be, but it's just a second of closeness. He doesn't mind too much.
You weren't in Konoha when Uzumaki fell,
Tsunade says, curious and assessing.
I would remember if another Uzumaki made it there. A survivor?
Kurama grimaces even though he doesn't pull away. Do we have to talk about this? He complains. Kakashi got himself hurt. Can you help him?
Hatake's kid?
Tsunade hesitates, then glances back at her wary apprentice. Shizune seems to understand what she wants because she nods quickly, and Tsunade offers her a smile.
Shizune will help. I'm not fond of blood.
For a moment, Kurama just looks at her, wavering between decisions, but he knows what Naruto would have done. The old pervert sage needs some help too, he says, watching her eyes widen. He messed up his knee in a fight. No blood unless he pops a blood vessel at the sight of you. That makes Tsunade snort softly, and she pulls back, letting her hand drop.
I'm not going back to Konoha, she says stubbornly. There's nothing left for me there.
Kurama isn't Naruto. He can't convince her to come back through stubbornness and determination and his resemblance to Nawaki. However, he's a nine-tailed fox with a millennia of cunning to fall back on and no compunctions about manipulating people to get what he wants. I will make you, he tells her, even as he tries to think of a bet that she'll be certain she's going to win. Trap her in a deal, make her keep her word, and he can get her back to Konoha and let Naruto convince. Not all dreams are doomed at the start. She might hate him for it, but Kurama doesn't particularly care.
Let's get this over with,
Tsunade says, mouth tightening, and steps away.
Where is Hatake?
Black Gull Inn. Kurama matches her pace, letting Shizune and Itachi bring up the rear. The kid is very quiet, expression withdrawn, but Kurama doesn't look back. He'll either sort out whatever is in his messed up head right now, or he won't, and Kurama will have to try again. The silence lasts right up until the inn is in sight, and Kurama is already fishing for his key when Tsunade asks quietly,
She had a child?
Kurama blinks, distracted from his search, and he'd forgotten that, actually! Tsunade left Konoha as the Second Shinobi War was coming to a close, before Jiraiya even returned from training the Ame orphans. Minato and Kushina wouldn't even have graduated from the academy at that point. Yeah, he confirms and can't help but smile a little. With the Ondame, Jiraiya's student. Little blonde brat too loud for his own good. He got pretty much all of her temperament. Tsunade smiles a little too, but it falters a bare second later. She takes a careful breath, glancing up at Kurama, and questions,
Does he take after her in other ways?
For a moment, all Jiraiya can feel is confusion. Then, in a flash, he realizes just what she's referring to, and confusion jolts
Sideways into irritation!
He's a Jinchuriki, if that's what you mean, he says flatly. Another thing that runs in the family, isn't it? But he ended up the Kyuubi's host after it all but wiped out Konoha. People didn't care so much when it was Mito and Kushina. But Naruto? I don't think anyone has ever given him so much as a hug before I found him.
Found! Shisui says dryly from the doorway of the inn where he's leaning against the frame with his brows practically touching his hairline. Is this some obscure Uzushio dialect synonym for stall? Because I seem to remember the mobilization of 4 of the 5 great nations to hunt you down in a headlong cross-country pursuit with you being a misleading asshole the whole time. This is differently. Kurama rolls his eyes and doesn't deign to answer, pointedly ignoring Tsunade's amused and faintly disbelieving glance from beside him.
Is the idiot still alive?
So far, Shisui confirms, pushing the door open for their group and slinging an arm around Itachi's shoulder as the boy passes. His tone is flippant, but his eyes linger on Tsunade with clear relief. Tsunade-sama, thank you?
Don't thank me,
Tsunade says flatly, taking Tonton and waving Shizune on. She folds her arms around the little pig and sinks down in one of the chairs off to the side, telling her apprentice,
You'll be fine.
For half an instant, Cheeseby looks like he's about to protest vehemently, but before he can do more than open his mouth, Kurama catches his eye and gives him a look. His mouth snaps shut, and Kurama grins stealthily, then turns to Shizune.
This way,
He says, leading her down the hall to Kakashi's room. Need anything? Shizune takes a breath, pulls a hair tie from her pouch, and ties her hair up in a short tail. I'll be fine, but thank you, she answers with admirable composure, then lifts her chin, squares her shoulders, and heads into the room. Kurama could leave, go back into the main room and talk to Itachi again, keep an eye on things, try to bring Tsunade around. What he does instead is sit down against the edge of the door, his back to the wall, and tip his head back to rest against the wood. There's a window at the end of the hall, within his line of vision if he tilts his head, and he can see the iron-gray sky through the dirty glass. It's snowing, he thinks, and closes his eyes. He wonders what Naruto is doing right now. If he's happy, if he's sad, if Kiri is as hostile as Gana'a. But even if it is, it won't matter nearly as much. Naruto has Gaara and Fu, and Yugito, Utakata and Yagura, maybe even Zabuza and Haku. He'll be fine until Kurama can make it back. That doesn't mean Kurama misses him any less. There's a box on the table of Orochimaru's lab, wooden and beautifully crafted, looking like the nesting silk should hold a pretty piece of jewelry, rather than the pair of vials it does. Orochimaru taps his fingers against the tabletop regarding the glass tubes, and is pleased all over again that he thought to scoop up the treasure Danzo had so carelessly thrown away. Kabuto has proven his worth many times over. More's the pity that Orochimaru didn't find him in time to save the other one, the woman from the orphanage. She could have been useful as well. And she was like a mother, perhaps. Not that it has any bearing, he supposes. Not anymore. Regardless, the genetic samples have been recovered, a new lab has been secured, and Nagato has been pressed, however reluctantly, into service. He won't be required for several hours. The process is intensive, and while Senju Tobirama may have been able to use it in battle on the move, Orochimaru has had to recreate it from scattered notes in Sarutobi's recollections. Even once the souls have been recalled and bound, Orochimaru will need a week at least to craft personalized control seals. Letting either of these two particular shinobi run rampant in their base is most certainly not a good idea if they wish to keep it from looking like the old base. On a whim, Orochimaru picks up the white-wrapped file and turns it over in his fingers, studying the name marked out in Kabuto's neat hand. A familiar name, a man he met and fought with before everything changed. A tragedy for Konoha to lose him, and a greater one for them to face him now, woefully unprepared. Orochimaru cared little for worlds of truth and political power. He's doing this to prove he can, because it's the best way to ensure Nagato's aid, because it's interesting, and Orochimaru is never anything less than interested when strange chakra and obscure rituals are concerned. Because he has his own dreams, and there's the chance that this can bring him closer to them. Because if death can truly be undone, well, carefully, gently, Orochimaru sets the vials back down and turns to the items he'll need to recreate a Dotensai. Scrolls, samples, ink, seals, 2 bound sacrifices restrained with every binding seal and unsolvable twist of rope Orochimaru has learned in 40 years as a shinobi. He crouches down beside them, checking their breathing, and then rises again. Kakazu had found them, minor missing nin with small bounties on their heads, wanted dead or alive. Simple enough to arrange. Kakazu got the money, and Orochimaru gets the bodies. It's almost time. Things are very nearly ready. Orochimaru smirks to himself, picking up the bottle of ink and a brush. On the far side of the room, his partner raises his head, narrowing his eyes. But Orochimaru ignores Sasori with the ease of practice. The puppeteer is only present as insurance, a way to overwhelm and subdue the revived shinobi if everything works as Orochimaru hopes it will, but they manage to break free.
The first line of ink falls like a sweep of midnight against gray stone, and Orochimaru smiles, imagining the storm that's sure to come.